Assalamualaikum everyone. So today we are going to look at chapter 8, which is the transport in mammals. And like the previous chapter that we have gone through, the earlier part of this chapter, I believe, is something that we have learned before, right? Especially in IGCSE. Okay, so let's proceed. Okay, before we move on any further, let's look at the learning outcomes that you need to know from this chapter. Okay, so the first one is that after going through this chapter, you must be able to describe the structure of the mammalian circulatory system. Okay. Number two, you must be able to relate the structure of arteries, veins, and capillaries to their functions. Number three, you must also be able to describe and explain the structure and functions of blood, including oxygen transport. Next, you must be able to describe and explain the formation of tissue fluid and lymph. Okay. The fifth one, you must be able to explain the structure and function of the heart. And number six, you must be able to describe the cardiac cycle and its control. Okay. It is very important for you to know the learning outcomes of every chapter because Cambridge will design the question or will prepare the question based on the learning outcomes. So, why do you think that animals require a specific and extensive transport system? Unlike plant, the transport system in animals is not only extensive, they are quite complex as well. Right? So the reason is, first of all, it is because animals are basically more active than plants. They rely on locomotion or movement to find food since they can't manufacture their own. And this is energy consuming. And therefore, animals have higher energy consumption compared to plants. In animals, the transport system is a well-organized system with pumps to keep fluid moving through them as they can't rely on diffusion alone. Right? But very small organisms such as paramecium or amoeba, they can meet their requirements for the supply of nutrients and oxygen by means of diffusion. I guess this is a very familiar diagram to you. This is a mammalian cardiovascular system. The mammalian cardiovascular system is also known as a complete double closed circulatory system. Why is it known as closed? Closed is because blood of the mammals comprising the blood cells and blood plasma always remain within the blood vessels. And if you trace the flow of the blood around the body, beginning in the left ventricle, you will find that the blood travels twice to the heart on one complete circuit, right? So therefore, it is also called as a double circulatory system. Okay, so if you look at the diagram that you have here, first of all, blood is pumped out of the left ventricle into the aorta and travels from there to all parts of the body except the lung. Right? It returns to the right side of the heart, which is in the vena cava, and the whole flow from the left ventricle back to the right ventricle is known as the systemic circulation. Okay, so the blood is then pumped out from the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery, which then carries the blood to the lungs. Right? And finally, once the blood has carried out the gaseous exchange process at the lungs, it will move back to the heart through pulmonary vein. And this flow here is known as the pulmonary circulation. Right? So these are some points for the slide that I've shown to you just now. Basically, it's about the flow of blood. in the complete double closed circulatory system of mammals. Just as a comparison, this is how blood circulatory system in fish looks like. And this is known as the closed single circulatory system. Closed is because the blood is always contained in the blood vessels, just like the mammalian. Single is because in one complete blood circulation, blood only moves to the heart once, right? If you look at the diagram, you can see that the structure of the heart has only one ventricle and one auricle. And in fish, the gaseous exchange process takes place in their gills, unlike mammals where the gaseous exchange occurs in the lungs. Okay, so the diagram that we have here shows some of the organs that you can actually find in a human body. Right? And if you look carefully, you will notice that every single organ in the human body will be connected to a pair of blood vessels, right, comprising of a vein and also an artery. Right, so we have a few different vein and artery here. Okay, first of all, we have here what we call as the jugular vein, right? And basically, the function of jugular vein is to collect blood from the skull, the brain, and majority parts of the neck. And the pair for jugular vein will be the carotid artery, and it has the opposite function. So the function is basically to supply blood to those parts that I've mentioned just now. Okay, and then we have down here the subclavian vein. Okay, and the function of subclavian vein is to collect blood from the upper parts of the body, specifically the shoulder part, and also the upper part of, the upper part of the limbs, right, which is the hands. And the pair of subclavian vein is the subclavian artery. So it has the opposite function of the subclavian vein, which is to supply blood to those parts that I've mentioned just now. Okay, and then we also have here what we call as the hepatic artery. And the pair is hepatic vein. So basically, hepatic artery supply nutrient, oxygen to the liver, and therefore hepatic vein collects deoxygenated blood from the liver. And down here, we also have what we call as hepatic portal vein. So the function of hepatic portal vein is to collect blood from the gastrointestinal tract or the intestine. And the pair for hepatic portal vein is the mesenteric artery. Right? It has the opposite function, which is to supply blood, to supply oxygenated blood to the gastrointestinal tract or the intestine. And then we have here the renal artery. The pair is renal vein. The function of renal artery is to supply nutrient, oxygen to the kidney. So renal vein will have the opposite function. And finally, we have the iliac artery and iliac vein. So supply of iliac artery is to, the function of iliac artery is to supply blood to tissues and organs in the pelvic region, such as the reproductive organs, right? And it also supply blood to the lower limbs, right, the legs. So iliac vein will have the opposite function of that. So next we are going to look at one of the components of the blood circulatory system, which are the blood vessels. And as you may have already known by now, three types of blood vessels are the artery, vein, and capillary. Basically, arteries are the blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart, and veins are blood vessels that carry blood to the heart, while capillaries are smaller vessels that link both of them. So let's start off with the features of the arteries, right? By now you should have already known that arteries transport blood at a very high pressure. The structure of the wall of an artery enables it to perform this function. If you look at the diagram here, you can see that both arteries and veins are made up of three layers. Right? The three layers are the inner endothelium, okay, also known as tunica intima, and this layer is made up of flat cells known as squamous epithelium. Okay? The layer is very smooth in order to minimize friction with the moving blood inside the lumen. And there is also a middle layer, okay, known as the tunica media, and it contains a lot of smooth muscle, collagen, as well as elastic fibers. And finally, we have the outermost layer called the, okay, or known as the tunica externa, and it contains some elastic fibers as well as collagen fibers. And if you look at the diagram, one very obvious difference between the veins and arteries is the thickness of their wall, right? Arteries have the thickest wall out of the three. This is because blood leaving the heart is at a very high pressure, about 120 millimeter mercury, or somewhere around 16 kilopascal. And having a thick wall enables the arteries to withstand such pressure, as the thick wall provides strength and elasticity. And between the three layers that we have seen just now, tunica media is the thickest one. And this layer provides the arteries a large amount of elastic fibers. And having large amount of elastic fibers means that arteries are more elastic. This allows the wall to stretch as pulses of blood surge inside the arteries at a very high pressure. Right? So arteries located further away from the heart will have fewer elastic fibers as pressure decreases. And being elastic is very crucial for the arteries. Okay? Why? Because if it is not elastic and it is not able to stretch or recoil, the arteries might burst due to the high pressure that comes from the heart. Right? Bigger arteries will branch to smaller ones, and the smallest arteries are known as the arterioles. Unlike arteries, arterioles have higher portion of smooth muscles. They don't really need a lot of elastic fibers because pressure in arteriole is much lower than the artery. Right? Arterioles have higher portion of smooth muscles, which can contract and narrowing their diameter. Right? This function helps the body to control the volume of blood flowing into a tissue at different time. So this is a diagram that shows how blood moves in an artery. Like I said just now, blood is pumped out of the heart in form of pulses, rushing out at a very high pressure as ventricle contract. So if you look here, whenever the ventricle contract, high pressure blood will cause the arteries to stretch and becomes wider. Right? And whenever ventricle relaxes, okay, like you see down here, blood at a lower pressure enters the artery, and since it enters the artery at a lower pressure compared to when ventricle contracts. Okay, the presence of high amount of elastic fibers in the wall of the arteries will enable the wall of the artery to recoil inwards and pushes the blood further ahead, right? And this continuous rhythmic process is how blood moves in the artery, like I said, in the form of pulses. So these are some points on arteries that we've discussed in the previous slides just now. You can copy them or you can pause the video to read it again. So next we are going to look at the capillaries. And we've already looked at the structure of artery and arterioles just now. Right? Basically, arterioles are branches of arteries, but arterioles themselves will continue to branch, which eventually form the smallest or the tiniest of all blood vessels, known as the capillaries. And capillaries form a network throughout every tissues in the body, and this helps to bring blood as close as possible to each group of cells in the body. The size of capillary is about 7 micrometer in diameter, which is roughly about the same size of the RBC, the red blood cell. And this is very important. Why? Because it will only, the capillary will only allow one RBC to squeeze into the capillary at any one time, which in return will bring every single RBC as close as possible to the body cell. Okay? Structure-wise, capillary is made up of single endothelial cells with a lot of tiny gaps that allows the formation of tissue fluid, which we are going to learn later on. Okay, as usual, some of the points that we've discussed just now in the previous slide. Okay, so finally we are going to look at the veins. And if you look at the diagram that we have here, as blood leaves a capillary bed, the capillaries gradually join with one another, forming larger vessels called venules, which will later join to form veins. And the function of a vein is to return blood back to the heart. However, by the time blood enters a vein, its pressure has dropped to a very low value, which is roughly about 5 millimeter mercury. And this is a very low pressure as compared to the arteries. And this also explains why veins have much thinner walls and fewer elastic and muscle fibers. However, low blood pressure causes a problem on how blood can actually be returned back to the heart against gravity. And if it is unaided, blood would just sink and accumulate at the lower part of your body, especially at the legs. To overcome this problem, many of the veins run very close to the leg muscles. Whenever the leg muscles contract due to movement, they will squeeze inwards. The muscles will squeeze inwards on the veins, which will temporarily raise the pressure inside the vein, okay, like you see here. And this will push blood upwards. And to keep blood flowing in the right direction, veins contain what we call as semilunar valve, okay, that is formed from the endothelium layer. And the semilunar valve prevents backflow of blood, and this will ensure that blood will be taken back to the heart. Okay, so I guess that's pretty much it about the blood vessels. So I'm just going to stop here for today, and inshallah we are going to continue the rest of the topic in the next session. Okay guys, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.